Good morning from Moscow, everyone. It's Monday, the 1st of June. Now, before we take a look at what's in today's Russian papers, a little update on last week. If you watched my press review last Monday, you may remember there was an article in Moskovsky Komsomolets that really surprised me. It claimed that throughout Russian history, major geopolitical losses were sometimes more useful than brilliant victories. And it seemed to be at odds, completely at odds, with the message that the Russian authorities like to project of Russia as a country of victors and of victories. And I thought at the time that perhaps this was an attempt to suggest that it would be okay for Russia to end its war on Ukraine, not on its maximalist terms, its maximalist demands. However, this article is now no longer available, no longer accessible on the Moskovsky Komsomolets website, which suggests that this particular argument did not go down well with the powers that be. And what this man said at the Moscow Economic Forum in April hasn't gone down well with the ultra-pro-Kremlin Komsomolskaya Pravda, which writes about him today. At the forum, academician Robert Nigmatulin said that Russia is in deep water. His fiery speech criticising economic problems is still being talked about in social media. Perhaps that is why this paper felt the need to publish this article, which reads like an attempt to discredit the academician and his family, rather than address the various points he made in his speech. By the way, newspaper articles are not the only things to disappear. After the Putin-Trump summit in Alaska last summer, for months afterwards, Russian officials would talk about the so-called spirit of anchorage, as if to suggest that the leaders of America and Russia had reached some kind of understanding or agreement on Ukraine. But a few days ago, President Putin's foreign policy aide Yuri Ushakov said actually he didn't know what the spirit of anchorage was. And today's Moskovsky Komsomolets seems to be wondering the same thing. Following US criticism of Russia at the UN over its recent mass strikes on Kyiv, the deputy US representative to the UN, Tammy Bruce, called the strikes an inexplicable, dangerous and barbaric escalation. She also stated that the US cautioned Russia not to make so-called systematic strikes against Kyiv, which risk further civilian casualties and setting back the prospects for peace. The spirit of anchorage, does that presuppose Russian sovereignty or what? Nezavismaya Gazeta's lead story, Russian regions and big businesses are arming themselves to defend against attacks by Ukrainian drones. A summary here of some of the problems Russia is facing. An increasing number of Russian regions are having to respond to Ukrainian attacks and take independent measures to prevent them. The new regions of Russia, that's a reference to Russian-occupied Ukrainian territory that Russia claims to have annexed, are facing local logistical difficulties due to attacks on the Novorossiya highway. Fuel shortages are growing in Crimea. Some regions are trying to resist attacks off their own back. Departments for anti-drone defence and special volunteer detachments of reservists are being created to protect energy facilities. And big business has been promised it will be allowed to purchase large caliber weapons for self-defence. The Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs proposes using electronic warfare systems and lasers, and not only small arms, to defend against attacks on industrial facilities. If you want some good news, then it's back to Komsomolskaya Pravda, which tells us that bananas from Sochi are very tasty. Farmers in Krasnodar are ready to feed the country with homegrown lemons, kiwis, figs and other exotic fruit. And Moskovsky Komsomolets jokes about the price of petrol. Here's a conversation at a petrol station. I need to warn you, petrol is a little more expensive today. Oh, in that case, please give me 30 litres of petrol from yesterday.